Welcome to Talking Industrial Automation, a podcast where you get to know the people who make modern industrial automation possible. You will get to hear from CSIA system integrators and industry partners to get a better understanding of how they help their clients solve process challenges and how they've earned success in their careers. Along the way, we will touch on system integration best practices, technology, trends, and challenges. Whether you are a manufacturer, end user, supplier, or system integrator, you will enjoy the insights these industry professionals bring to this podcast. Let's get started. Hi, my name is Lisa Richter, the host of Talking Industrial Automation, a podcast where you get to know the people who make modern industrial automation and processing possible. In today's episode, we're talking industrial automation with Theresa Benson, who is a product storyteller and strategist with over 20 years of experience in high tech. After earning her electrical engineering degree from Iowa State University, she spent her career working in semiconductor, industrial automation, and AI software companies before moving into strategy development and consulting. A former colleague once called her corporate spackle because she comes in and fills in the gaps quickly, diagnosing issues and moving people forward in the face of ambiguity. Theresa understands what makes something valuable and then helps companies tell their story in the way that their market needs to hear. She is also a published author, public speaker, and even, on occasion, an educator. Finally, full disclosure, I must point out that Theresa earned the CSIA Rising Star Award in 2020, and I nominated her. Theresa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I am so happy to be here. And I know I said thank you back when you nominated me and when I won, but thank you again. I love what CSIA's mission is. I love working with you, and I'm so happy to be able to be on the pod.
So let's start out just with the basics. Walk us through a little bit more about your career journey.
Sure. So like you said in the intro, I have my electrical engineering degree, which I think some of my EE professors probably questioned why I was getting into that, because I was also at the same time taking a lot of creative writing sort of classes. I've always been in these two different worlds, super high tech and then creative and people. So when I graduated from university, I went to Texas Instruments, semiconductors. I worked in the semiconductor industry for 15 years. I had the opportunity to work on the iPod before the iPod existed in the world, which was really a magical opportunity for me. I got to work in the white goods sector and understand how our washers and dryers and everything are put together, and the high-tech nature that they were starting to get into really fascinated me. You know, we take for granted now, I think, sometimes the LCD panels in refrigerators or smart home. I think there was just an article out that said appliance manufacturers are bummed that people aren't connecting their appliances to their networks. And I was fortunate enough to be working with appliance manufacturers back when all of that was just crazy ideas. So I did that for a while. I was with TI for 15 years. I then moved into a really small firm who was doing wireless technology, did that, moved into industrial automation, first at Mitsubishi Electric and then at Red Lion, where we got the opportunity to meet. And what I love about the industrial automation community is I think the people in industrial automation are the unsung heroes of society. I mean, the way that system integrators, production line engineers think about how stuff is made is so complex and honestly beautiful. When you go into these plants that are making things we use every day and see how just elegant the solutions are, it really is fascinating. And so to have gone from this world that was super cutting edge, high tech into white goods and then into manufacturing, it really was a unique and interesting transition, and one that I've been thrilled to have been a part of. then the opportunity came up for me to move into software. So I had been doing a lot with hardware with semiconductors. Then I moved into sort of the application of that hardware in industrial automation. And then I went into software. And what was really interesting about that transition is I moved into decision automation. So it was still automation, but it was the application of automation for the purpose of making all of the complex decisions businesses make every day. If you think about like a mortgage lender and all of the things, not just your credit score, but how many homes do you own? What are your assets? What are your liabilities? Everything that goes, there are so many decisions that are being made. And to be able to automate those helps everyone because to a large degree, all of us want that instant answer. What do I qualify for? And the difference that was so profound to me between what I experienced in industrial automation and in this era of knowledge automation was that in the knowledge automation arena, the focus was on keeping the subject matter experts involved in the automation. So the company I worked for made software that made making these huge, complex decisions super easy for the everyman. So if you had been the person who traditionally was in the loop making that mortgage call, am I going to give this borrower and how much money am I going to give them and at what rate? Now all of it's being automated, but you are actually empowered to write the code essentially to make those decisions, but you're doing it in a way that isn't code-like. Whereas in industrial automation, what I noticed is, frontline knowledge was being transferred into machine code, and it went from Al, who knew exactly how tight to tighten a bolt, to some code that a robot is going to use. And I think what I found so fascinating about the software automation is that Al is still in the loop. In fact, Al probably wrote the commands to make that happen. So then that company acquired a machine learning company and a process automation company. And by process automation, I mean business process, not process automation in the industrial sense. And it just further deepened my amazement at how the software industry was empowering citizen data scientists, citizen coders, these no code drag and drop sorts of environments that were enabling this ultra, ultra, ultra high tech, fast stuff to occur, but it wasn't disenfranchising the people that it purported to replace. Instead, it enabled them to do their jobs more effectively. What's interesting is now that I'm in my role as a strategist and consultant, I am seeing those echoes creep into industrial automation. Everybody is Industry 4.0, 4.0, but there is 5IR, or the fifth industrial revolution. And what that's really about is bringing people back in to it, to collaborate with the automation that Industry 4.0 did. And it's such a weird parallel to my experience. I was in industrial automation where it was all about get the data and automate, moved into automate, but keep people in the loop. And now I'm seeing that holistic, both sides coming together in industrial automation. That's a long answer to a simple question, but there you go.
No, I appreciate that. That's a great perspective. And thinking about automating these decisions like a mortgage or something like that.
Yeah.
Having the code make the decision takes some of that human bias out too. So in a way, it's an equalizer, I would imagine.
I've actually given a couple talks on this. So it absolutely can be, and that's the goal. The problem is if you're using machine learning and things like that, you're using that, you're training it based on decisions that were made in the past. So if the data you train a model on is biased because in the past decisions were made that were biased in some way, then the model is going to learn that bias. And so then when you automate decisions using a model that's biased, you actually can madly exacerbate the bias. We've seen it. There have been headlines about how models in hiring practices were trained and unintentionally weeded out women, unintentionally weeded out certain language in resumes because it was trained on male applicants. And the same is true, in mortgage decisions or anything else. New York City has enacted legislation to force companies to ensure that any automated decisions they're making are as free from bias as possible. The European Union is doing a lot in that arena as well. It's really very fascinating.
I think people talk a lot about the technology, what the technology can do, but the ethics discussion doesn't happen nearly as often as I would hope that it did.
Yeah, it's only been recently that companies are hiring chief ethics officers and data ethics officers, to really examine how decisions are getting made programmatically. And that extends into all kinds of areas of our life, really. Even think of the ethics of autonomous vehicles. It's really a fascinating arena. And that's what's always been fascinating to me is the technology and the people and how they interact and impact each other. It's wild.
While the solutions to every challenge facing the industry today are not always clear, one thing is certain. A successful business must be bold as it tackles these changing times head on. The CSIA 2023 Executive Conference is just the place to be to explore these changes, opportunities, and solutions. With a carefully curated educational agenda, formal and informal networking opportunities, and an expo to showcase the latest innovations, the conference is built to bring you the resources you need to succeed. Plus, this year, CSIA is putting extra emphasis on bringing you 4 highly rated keynote speakers to ensure you walk away with actionable advice, thought-provoking ideas, and an energized attitude. And best of all, you'll do it in the iconic city of New Orleans. For more information, visit www.controlsys.org/conference 2023. See you May 15th through the 19th in the Big Easy. Going back to your comment earlier about how appliance manufacturers are kind of bummed that people aren't hooking them up. Hello, there's people are just going to be distrustful of their data being shared. Like, I don't want anybody to know what time I open that refrigerator. So it's 2 a.m. So judgy.
Yeah, exactly. It's really interesting. I think that appliance manufacturers thought that more people would be wanting to connect everything up. And let's assume noblest intent for a moment. If your dryer is connected in some way and you have a problem, you can't get it to work or it has a weird squeak or whatever, the idea that you could go online to your appliance manufacturer's website, put in a ticket, maybe click a button and they get some diagnostic information remotely. So you're not paying for a service call. You're not paying for somebody to drive out until they actually know what's wrong by remotely diagnosing it. That is wonderful. And that is good and a great application. But as any of the network engineers who might be listening to your podcast are aware, putting a bunch of stuff on your network that you don't have active control over is potentially scary. I mean, what if somebody with a malicious intent turns your dryer into essentially a bot, or part of a Bitcoin mining operation, and suddenly your dryer isn't working for completely different reasons? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's taking it to the extreme, but it's a potential concern.
I'm pretty sure there was an episode of Silicon Valley where they tapped into a refrigerator to hack the network or something like that. People are thinking about that stuff right now.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about the appliances in my home. Yeah, I don't have any of mine connected up. I guess I'm part of that number in the recent news articles.
So tell me a little bit about what you think is the smartest decision you've made recently.
Well, besides reconnecting with you and being on this podcast, I would say it was a great decision, but it was a tough decision. Was in the spring of last year, I actually took a step back from what I had been doing. I think the last several years, everybody would recognize have been a huge challenge. Emotionally, a lot of us have experienced loss or sickness or just even had challenges with being remote. If that's not to your liking, I personally love it, but it's not everybody's cup of tea. Supply chain-ish, everything. My 2021 was pretty unique in that I experienced a lot of loss in my family. 5 family members pass away over the course of the year. And I had really tried to just keep going. The company I was at was amazing and very flexible. But in the spring of last year, I decided, you know what? I just need to take a second. I need to take a breath and really process everything that went on. And it was the first time I'd ever done anything like that in my career, is to stop. There's a drum beat for all of us to work, work, work. And I think it was a really good decision. I miss my coworkers, but it really helped me figure out what did I want to do. And what I love doing is helping people, connecting what people want to do with actual ways to get it done. And being out of the role I was in is giving me the opportunity to do more of that. And it's scary sometimes, but it's great. It was a really good decision.
Thank you for sharing. That's kind of a vulnerable thing to admit to, so I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about how you approach a project. What's unique about that?
Well, I spent the early part of my career in sales. I think there's a lot of different ways that people sell. There's the hunter salesperson who's out looking for the opportunity and always be closing, and Glenn Ross, coffee is for closers, that whole thing. That was never my style. I'm more what I would call a farmer salesperson, in that I have to go figure out if the soil is fertile. Like, have I built the right relationships? Do I understand the landscape? Am I really looking at whatever the situation is in the right way? Then I add to it what it needs. So if what I come into isn't familiar with my product or service, okay, then I need to do some fertilization. I need to give it some input. Only then, once I've planted the seeds of the idea of working with me, can I then harvest the result. And that's just my approach. And so similarly with projects, especially my industrial automation days, I built this wastewater demo that used all of the different products in my company. And I went and figured out, okay, sales team, what is it that you need most in order to make this impactful for you? Channel partners, how would this work for you when you're demoing our products to customers? And then going to the water wastewater industry and understanding their actual challenges. And instead of building something that showed every feature of every product and chest pounding, this is magic. Instead, it was, hey, you know how you have that one problem? Here's how these things working together fixes it. And so it's all about that listening. It's all about, yeah, I have my agenda. I wanted to sell more stuff, or I wanted to demo every feature of my product. But it was more about sitting down and figuring out, what did they need? And then figuring out the intersection point where both of us could win. I'm sure there are tons of people out there who do it, but I'd like to think that I have a decent approach.
Let's talk about a project that was super challenging and what you did to solve the problem.
Well, when I very first got into the industrial automation space, I went to work for a CNC and robotics manufacturer. And when I started there, I tell people I didn't know how to spell CNC. I was brought in to an organization that made their money when things were broken. It was service and support. So you made money either by selling a part, repairing something that a customer would send in, or sending a service engineer out to fix it. And as quality improves, and if we did our job right and fixed whatever was broken, you're not going to need us again for a while. So if the quality remained good, eventually your revenue stream starts to sort of trickle to a stop. And I was brought in, and I just so appreciate the leadership team for trusting someone completely out of the industry to find ways to grow revenue, even when everything was running. I knew I couldn't send people out in dark clothing to like break everything at our customers' plants. That was not going to be the way to grow revenue.
No.
And I didn't have a sales team. I had service engineers and customer service people who were on the phones as my sales channel. And so I needed to find a way to first and foremost meet the needs of our served customers whose machines are running, and so they don't want to hear from us, and meet the needs of my sales channel who didn't want to sell anything. They wanted to help, but they don't want to sell. They don't want to be that used car salesman. Hey, I got a deal for you. So it was incredibly challenging to find how we were going to grow revenue. But the same thing that I just talked about as far as like listening, understanding what the problems really were, that served me just as well there. I mean, I sat down with our people, figured out what were the parts that were broken in terms of our processes for selling value-added services. You know, like, hey, if we just came in and fixed some stuff, you have a 30-day warranty. You can extend that to a year in case anything goes wrong. How do you approach that in such a way that somebody wants to listen? Or helping our customer service team, if a customer called in for part A, they're almost certainly going to need part B and C, because if A is broken, the other things probably are. And how can we upsell, not just because we're going to make more money, but because it's going to be a pain in the keister for the customer when they get part A in and realize, oh crap, they need part B and C, and now they're waiting even longer and their plant is down. So getting to the heart of why, and then connecting my people to that reason made all the difference. I mean, we introduced new services. We had one service that we sold 8 of our first year that I was there. That was for the entire year, not like a quarter. It had been around since before I got there. And the last year I was there, we were selling on average 450 a year. And it's because we figured out the why. We figured out the story. We connected the value of the thing to a real need. That makes all the difference.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Talking Industrial Automation. But there is more where this came from. The next episode will continue the conversation with Theresa. In the meantime, if you want more information about her, you can find her on LinkedIn. That's Benson with an O, not an E, or at her website, which is www.radiantmeatball.com. Thanks for listening, and thank you, Theresa, for joining me today. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also help others find us by leaving a 5-star review and sharing your favorite episodes with colleagues. Thanks for listening to the Talking Industrial Automation podcast. Thanks also to bensound.com and Wistia for the music bumpers. Until next time.